Welcome to episode 5 of Beginner Web Design, and we pretty much know how to set up the basic layout of our page, and we went over some basic formatting elements, and now we're going to go a little more in depth about the types of elements. So there are two types of elements. There are block level elements and there are inline level elements. And a block element pretty much takes up the entire line or multiple lines on the page. An inline element fits right in the line of text, so it doesn't really take up as much space normally, and it doesn't really disrupt the other text that's around it or the other elements around it. So let's just take a look at a few examples of this. So if you remember in episode 2, I think it was, I briefly mentioned the P element, and this element is just declaring a paragraph. So we can type a bunch of text in here, and no matter what it is going to stay by itself because P is a block level element. So if just say we have some text before the paragraph and some text after the paragraph, when we preview it, the paragraph gets its own little area here. Now the reason why it's important to use block level elements is because by nature any text that you type into the body will be in line. So for example, if we try to type two paragraphs in our body, so let's just say first paragraph, and then we want to type the second paragraph. So naturally we're just going to hit return twice and just say second paragraph. And you would think that that would create two different paragraphs. But because it's all text within the body, it's in line. So there really is no difference between doing this and doing this. It's the exact same thing. But if we wrap these in paragraph tags, now they each become their own line because they have a separate little box that's containing them, and that's essentially what a block element is. It's just a box that goes across the entire width of the page. Now these are really customizable in CSS because we get to add different things like margins and paddings and even backgrounds to these. And it really increases what you can do by using block elements. And they don't always have to be 100% width. We'll soon learn that you can make them different sizes and make them connect with each other. It's really quite awesome how it works. So other than that, there are very easy to remember block elements. For example, if just say you want a header on top, we can type header, right? Now inside, let's say we want navigation, so we can type nav, and in here we can type all of our navigation links, and these are both block level elements. So here I have a block level element inside another block level element, which is the nav inside of the header, which is possible. You can do that. Now, other than that, there is also things like footer. That's really helpful if maybe you need a spot to display your copyright info. That works too. You can use article. You can use aside, which is great for sidebars. And there's just a whole lot more elements that are block level that really do help add content to your website. Now I'm not going to list every single element in this video, but as we progress and add more and more things to our pages, we will be learning about them in time. Now as for inline elements, we have already gone over a lot of them. For example, bold, strong, italic, emphasis, strike through. And that's pretty much all the ones that we need to worry about for right now. There are some other things, but mostly any other inline elements that you'll be using is part of forms, which there's a separate tutorial on how to make forms, which will be coming out in a few days. So but besides those elements, there are two elements that are very, very frequently used, and that is the div and the span, and I'll type these out. And these elements pretty much have no styling on them whatsoever, so they're not going to necessarily edit the content that's in them by default. However, they kind of provide a clean slate for CSS to use. So we're going to learn that now we can use these elements in conjunction with CSS, and CSS can put certain styles on the div and on the span, and it won't interfere with any other styles, such as, for example, if you were to use the B for a bold piece of text. Now we can target this with CSS and just say make it bold and italic. But if just say you didn't want to do that and you wanted to leave the regular functionality of the B element, you can just use a span. And that span is kind of like a nice little work area to create your own custom styles. And you'll see what I mean when we finally go into CSS. Now let's look at some more advanced elements that kind of require a little bit more work than just declaring an opening tag and a closing tag. So let's look at lists right now. There are two types of lists. There are ordered lists, which are OL, and there are unordered lists, which are UL. Unordered is going to be prefixed by bullets for every item in the list, and ordered lists have a prefix of numbers, so it'll go from 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So in our ordered lists, if just say we wanted to add a few things here, we have to type in an LI, which means list item, and then we can type in the first item. So I'll type milk. Now we go to the next line and we're going to do another list item. I'm going to do eggs and bread. Also, do not forget that you do have to type the closing tag for each one of these LIs. Now you just really don't see me type it in because my editor just closes off the tags for me automatically. But if your editor does not support that option, make sure you do type it in manually. Otherwise, it's just not validating code. Now if we preview this, we see that milk, eggs, and bread all have a number 1, 2, and 3, and they are automatically assigned, so we don't actually have to type in each one. This is great because just say we have to insert another list item here. So I'll make it candy. Now you can see it automatically renumbers them, and we don't have to go in and change practically anything. The unordered lists are exactly the same. So I'm just going to copy all of these and paste them right into our unordered list element. And if we preview that, now we have it with a prefix of bullets. So you could see that you can just easily create lists just by using any of these. And don't worry if you don't necessarily like these styles. There are other options that we can use in CSS to make it Roman numerals or square bullets and things like that. We'll get into that. Now I also want to go over the image tag because this is something that you will probably use a lot. So the image tag is a self-closing tag. So for example, all we have to type is image and then a slash and the closing bracket. Just as that meta was, we don't have to type an entire closing tag like that. It's unnecessary. Now, how do we actually specify the image that we want to use? Well, it's kind of confusing to some people, but it's really not that difficult to get your head wrapped around. Basically, on any HTML element, we can add attributes. So, for example, this image has an attribute called source, or src. And this source attribute just lets you tell the browser where this image is located. So in order to take advantage of an attribute, all we have to type is src. And then we can type an equal sign and 2 quotes. Inside these quotes, we just type whatever the value of source is. So I'm going to insert an image right here. And this is the link to an image. If we go to our browser and we go to that URL, you will see an image. So I just put that inside of our image element here. So this works with anything. As long as you know what an attribute is, all you have to do is put a space after the element name, that attribute, an equal sign, and then the value in quotes. Now, if it seems confusing to you, don't worry. In time, you will get the hang of it, and I'll show you more examples in the future. Now, if we go ahead and preview this, we will see the image on our page. However, there is one more attribute that we have to add onto this image. That attribute is alt. So we're going to put another space here and type in alt equals quote quote. And alt just specifies what to display in the case that the browser cannot find the image. So normally, if just say it can't find the image, so I'll just put in, any random URL that obviously isn't an image. If we go and preview it, this little question mark icon comes up, and it's pretty much the same for any browser. Now, if just say we want to specify what the browser should say in the case that this does happen, we can type that in the alt attribute. So let's type in dog. Now I'm just going to put back this URL. And the other thing that we can do for images is put in a height and a width. And the reason that you may want to do this is because if you have used CSS to make the image basically interact with other parts of the page or other parts of text, then you don't necessarily want it to kind of mix up the text while it's loading. And I'm going to show you an example of that. So let's say we have a paragraph here. So I'm going to wrap this in a paragraph, and then let's just say we have a lot of text here. So I'm going to grab some text and put it right in. Now when we preview that, it was kind of fast, so you might want to just rewind real quick and just see that again. But basically, while the image is loading, this text is moving down, and that might not be exactly what you want. So you can kind of see it again. For images after the browser has already looked at the web page, it pretty much caches these images, so it's not going to necessarily take as long. But with some of these images, we still have that bouncing effect. As you can see, it just happened right there. The text started up here, and then the image slowly pushed it down. So maybe you don't necessarily want that to happen. You want it to stay the same while it's loading. How do we do that? We can specify a width and a height of that image. So let's put in here width 400, height 300. And now when we preview that, it's not going to happen. You can see even when an image is loading, the text stays in place because it knows how big that image is going to be. Now you can also set it to a different size. So let's say if you wanted to make it half the size, you can do 200 and 150. And the image is going to be smaller now. However, you do have to be careful because when you are changing the size of an image, the browser will take longer to render that on the page. So use that sparingly. Now the other thing we can do with images is there's an align attribute. So we can say align right, and then when we preview it, it's now on the right. Look at that. We could say left. There you go. We could say middle. And this kind of makes it the middle of one line, not necessarily the entire paragraph. But if you do want to mess around with that, you can use that. And you can play around with these settings to get the way you want your image to be shown on the page. Now that's pretty much it for the image tag. So now we know a lot of elements where we can actually go ahead and make at least a typeface in our browser. So we know how to create headers, we can create basic formatting like bold, italics, things like that. We can, use paragraphs, images, lists, a whole bunch of different things. And I know this episode is getting pretty long. We're just after 16.5 minutes, something like that. And there's one more thing I do want to go over. I know it's getting kind of tedious to watch all of this, but it's the link element. And obviously you're going to find this helpful eventually. And you can just link to another page on your website, or another image, an external website, anything you want. So the way we do this, and I've mentioned this a few times in the past, is just with that A tag. But naturally, if we type some text into this A tag, so for example, click here to go to Google. If we go and preview that, it's obviously not going to do anything because it doesn't know to take us to Google. So to do that, we're going to actually be using an attribute on this A tag. This attribute is href, and we could type that in. And now we just have to enter an URL. So I'll type in http://www.google.com. Now if we preview this and we click on it, we go to Google. It's pretty easy. Now there's one more thing I want to talk about attributes, is that attributes don't require the quotes. So we can actually type in ahref equals http:// etc. without having those quotes in there. So a lot of people think that's really helpful just because shorter code means faster rendering times, especially when the page is really, really long and has a ton of content on it. However, it's not always the best choice. If the value of an attribute has certain special characters, for example, if it contains a quotation mark, a single quote, any of the triangular brackets, there's a whole bunch of different characters that can't be placed inside that that attribute unless you put it inside quotes. So even though it might be nice to have that freedom to put in the quotes or not to put in the quotes, we have an example like this where if the image source is blah blah apostrophe.jpg, the page is going to render wrong because it doesn't understand why there's just a random quote there. So it's best just to throw in those two quotes around the value of an attribute, just to make it easier on you and just to make it easier on the browser. It'll be much easier than trying to figure out why this attribute isn't being applied to a certain element. There's just way too many characters that are going to make it unusable. So again, I would just recommend putting those quotes around it and not having to worry about it in the future. Now, in the next lesson, we are finally going into the magic of CSS. And we're going to explore all the neat things you can do with it and we're really going to get into really styling our page up and making it look amazing. So be sure to tune in for that.